to the state and future of board game design, where I have with me, when you're ready. Welcome, thank you. My name's Paul Dean. I'm one of the founders of Shut Up and Sit Down. We have a huge games area, thank you, on the third floor in the corner of this hall. So if you would like to come and play games or look at games or watch other people playing games or just sit at a table and eat a sandwich, which a lot of people are doing at the moment, please come by, because we're there like all week and it's quite a lot of fun and there's a lot of different interesting people. I have very limited games design experience. I have been one of the team who helped create the latest version of the Paranoia RPG, which is coming out soon, I think, I hope, because we finished it. With me are people who are going to be better at introducing themselves than I will, so I'm going to start on my left side with this fellow. Who are you, sir, and what have you recently done?
Let's see if this is a microphone. Oh, microphone is on. Hi, I'm Jeff Engelstein, and I guess my most recent games that came out were the Dragon and Flagon board game and the Fog of War. I've got 2 new games that are going to be coming out in the spring. Pit Crew and The Expanse, based on the sci-fi show. I'm also on the, thank you. I'm also on the Dice Tower podcast. I do the game tech segment there, as well as the Ludology podcast, which is a hour-long podcast about game design and various game-related topics. Good, okay. Succinct? Succinct was the key word.
I've been told to try and keep these people succinct. We'll see how that goes. On my right, immediately next to me, I have a Canadian. Would you introduce yourself, sir?
Hi, I'm a Canadian, and I'm sorry. My name is Eric Lang. I'm a board game designer, a tabletop designer. I've been doing this for a long time. I've designed a lot of board games for Fantasy Flight, Cool Mini or Not, some work for Wizards of the Coast. I've done some digital work on Duelists, the online trading card game, which we're doing a talk for on Friday. I've never been on Jeff Engelstein's Ludology podcast, so that clearly I'm the lesser of the guests.
It's a definite snub.
And a bunch of other games that I'm forgetting here in this moment, but
you did Blood Rage.
I did Blood Rage. There we go.
And furthest on my right, I have the foremost expert on Eric's portfolio, as Eric isn't. You are, sir?
My name is Rob Daviau. I've been doing professional board game design since 1998, 18 years, 14 of which was at Hasbro, so I've worked on a lot of classic games, Clues and Monopolies and Risks. I've been doing about 4 years on my own, where you probably, if you know me from asking you to rip up cards with legacy games, so Seafall, Pandemic Legacy, Risk Legacy. I also am part of a new company called Restoration Games, where we take old games that are out of print and restore them and bring them back, and I get the cool title of Chief Restoration Officer. So I spend a lot of time actually also thinking about the business end of things like graphics and pallets and shipping and warehousing. So.
And you also designed Blood Rage.
And I also designed Blood Rage.
You will notice on each side of you there are microphones. If you would like to queue up and ask questions, we will be taking questions from the audience. Do not be scared. This is probably the nicest panel that we have at GDC and the most approachable people. So if you want to begin queuing up at any time, feel free. Until then, I want to open... I assume that we all know that board games have really taken off. I assume that we all know it's become recently in North America like $1 billion industry. So it's a thing now, otherwise none of you would be here and interested in this. So I'm going to assume that you know that a lot of the design practices are similar, a lot of the foundations are similar. Why, Jeff, is it a particularly good or interesting time to be a games designer right now for board games?
Well, I think that there's a lot of really interesting things going on. One is just based on the expansion of the market itself. There's probably about 10, 15, 20% year-over-year growth in the number of games coming out. I think last year there were over 3,000 new board games added to the Board Game Geek database, which is a lot of games. And so, but it seems like the audience is growing, at least for now. And so we're getting a lot of you can do a lot of interesting things and you'll still be able to find some type of audience for your game. I've also been really excited about a lot of the new techniques that are perhaps taken from video games or certainly from movies and stories of bringing more narrative into games. And, with games like Pandemic Legacy that Rob did and others that there's a lot more very interesting type of work being done that we haven't seen before, whether it's episodic games like Time Stories or the legacy games where things are going in different directions and there's just a lot of creativity. So I've been very gratified to see that and that it's gotten some consumer acceptance. It's not just little art projects, but it's things that you can put out there and will actually sell.
Gents, is that true? By the way, because you're on different sides, you're now opponents.
Yes.
That's just how it is.
So I will disagree with the honorable representative from New Jersey. Yes, the pie is growing, but I feel like the number of games and the number of publishers, the number of designers are growing faster. And we are at a point where it's getting hard to get attention, right? It used to be if you had a name as a designer, that might be enough, or if you had a brand, that was enough, or if you had great art. Like now it feels like you need to have all of those three and get lucky and get the good reviews. And if those all come together, you'll get 3 to 5 months in the sun to try to make some money on it. And then the next big shiny thing comes around. And if you don't get all of those, you might get 3 to 5 weeks before the next shiny thing comes around. So it's good right now. I can make a living. I made a living off it last year and I'll make it this year. But 2 years from now, I don't know how long it will necessarily last.
Wow.
But you're looking at me like I was
coming from a chap who's established and has quite a cool portfolio. Eric, do you agree? I mean, you've made a lot of different games. You told me to
oppose him.
So this is the...
Oh, you can agree or well, I mean, surely you are constantly getting work. You seem to be releasing games all the time. Are you not okay?
I, Professor Gloom, I guess somewhat agree with Professor Doom. To a degree. I mean, it has never been a better time to be academically speaking, it's never been a better time to be a game designer. I mean, the foundation of the craft of game design is at a level that it's never been at before. I would say the average middle enfranchised game player now understands game design probably to a level that top level game designers in the 70s and 80s didn't understand at all. There's a wealth of great material online from established game companies, Wizards of the Coast, even Fantasy Flight, that's increasing our body of knowledge to a greater degree. Because of that, of course, it is also increasing competition because within every gamer, there is a budding game designer. We're all creative people. We all like to express ourselves. And like writing, game design appears to be very easy on the surface. So there are many, many more people who want to become game designers than there are slots for professional game designers to earn a living. But I embrace that. I think it's, to me, it keeps me on my toes. Rob and I actually discussed that a couple of weeks ago, right? We don't really feel like we're at the head of a curve. We actually feel like we're at the top of a cliff, waiting to be like at any time, waiting to be like pushed off by the smarter guys that we're going to come, smarter guys or girls that are going to come in here and just kick our asses.
Wow.
You told us to oppose him.
But isn't this not sort of partly how it should work? Like the best people should be noticed?
No, that's fine.
That's energizing.
Yeah.
If the barriers to entry, particularly, like you can paper prototype a board game in your house with paper clips and cardboard and things like that, and you don't need to learn Unity, you don't need to learn Game Maker. Surely having the barrier of entry low is a positive thing, and it fills the world with juicy ideas. No? Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes,
but I think that, it's certainly, if you look at the industry as a whole, I think it's very healthy and exciting. And you look at it's a great time to be a board game player.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of a designer, it's very, very difficult to get noticed, and I will certainly agree with that. And that's why one of the things I've seen is it seems like licensed games tend to get pushed to the front of the line. There's so many games that are coming out that it almost seems like a lot of these licenses or the bigger names, so you'll see just to take a random example, you'll see Pandemic has, 87 different variations because it's got that brand name, it's got that recognition. So you see what you're seeing in the movies where it's just another X-Men movie or another Avengers movie or whatever, you're kind of seeing that in the game world as well as a way to get attention and to get noticed.
Is that a way to get good regular work or a way to more reliably make money? Is it even a good idea to perhaps create a game that you can sort of paste a theme onto later?
Well, as a designer of yet another pandemic.
So, I'm not the pandemic guy. He's out there. Yeah, no, I think it's actually, this is a business. If we're talking about the business of making games, it's different than the passion for making games. Like when you said that inside every gamer is a game designer, something I talk about is a lot of people can make games and have a game and play with their friends, and that might be enough. Or they might want to get one game published but never leave their day job, and that's enough. What we're talking about, if we're talking about the business of games, and Eric and I do it full-time and Jeff does it part-time, is what do you need to do to make a living at it? And then you start putting all these business parameters around, like what's the brand recognition, and what's the art, and what's the release date, and do I make it language independent, and what's the audience, and all these sort of unsexy things when you talk about game design, because it's about game publishing then and the business of it rather than the joy of just making a game.
I heard, there's this thing called Kickstarter, and if I put my game on it, people will just see that my game's really good, and they'll pledge a lot of money, and I won't even need a publisher. And then some people somewhere will print it and send it out, and I'll make a lot of money. Because I've seen people make insert adjective here, sums of money on there. Is that a solution? Is that a symptom of the situation that we're in?
I am fascinated by this. I'd like to know more about it.
Tell me more.
Because maybe this is my interpretation. It feels to me like Kickstarter is filling a hole, or sort of like it's a panacea to some degree.
I don't know if it's filling a hole. So it's filling a hole on the supply side of the market for sure, right? Because it does bypass the critical processes of publishers, right? So there is the bar the bar of entry for producing a board game is, of course, much lower than a digital game, right? Especially on first blush, but it has increased the number of games that are coming out, of course. So the supply side is much, much higher than the demand side at this particular point. It is creating a lot of, I guess we call it painful successes, right? Where people who succeed, especially modestly on Kickstarter, then suddenly have to become a publisher, de facto publisher, and it turns them into a full-time fulfillment house, which is a extremely difficult logistical business, and most people don't want to do that. I think all of us included.
I've done it. I don't want to do it.
No, I did it for 2 years.
Yeah, no, the act of designing a game is like hard work but fun, like writing a book or making a song or any creative endeavor. And then the act of turning that into production files is like a different sort of fun project. And I think most people, or many people who use Kickstarters, and I think a lot of people don't feel this way anymore, and there's ways to, like third parties that can help you. The act of moving pallets of cardboard on boats, the fun tends to drop off for most people at that point, and it becomes incredibly medieval. Like where you're talking about like dock workers and cargo and lading and getting it onto trains and trucks and breaking things down. And it is not exceedingly difficult. It is very, very easy to do if you are willing to lose money doing it.
Wow.
Like, because every step of the way, you're like, oh, we should have done that. Oh, this should have cost less. Oh, this should have been in a smaller box. Oh, we didn't take into account this customs fee, or we put the wrong age grade on the box and now we can't sell it here. And so like there's these
We didn't meet minimum standards in Brazil. Whoops.
Yeah. So there's dozens of little mistakes you can make as a publisher that will either prevent your game from being sold, or you'll spend too much time, or you'll lose money, or not make the profits you had projected because it kept taking pennies and pennies out of your game. So that's the hazard to Kickstarter, is not everyone looks at what happens when you get the money. And again, a lot of these stories were from 3, 4, 5 years ago when it was a little more Wild West. I think there are many people who know that now and do their homework.
Surely now we have hundreds of Kickstarter people who all talk to each other and say, do it this way, and I did this and it went wrong, and all the problems are solved.
I wish.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's instructive also I'm probably not super qualified to talk on this because I've been predicting the demise of Kickstarter publicly for like 6 or 7 years now, or probably since it first started. So I don't have a great track record, but I mean, you do see, you still have your big mega successes like Kingdom Death, which was what, $12 million or something insane like that, and Scythe and things. But the bigger guys that used to be doing it, like Cool Mini, has publicly said that they're going to start backing away from the Kickstarter model and go with a more traditional publisher route. Queen was doing more Kickstarters and they're backing away. Stronghold tried it and they're not planning on doing another one. So I think even Stonemaier Games, I believe, they've said that they're not going to be doing as much on Kickstarter, who did Scythe. So I think that you're starting to see people go back to a more traditional publishing model, except for the very small guys or the new people that are trying to break into the market.
I do want to ask you guys sort of a couple. We're talking about the state and future of design-related questions as well. Otherwise, I think we'll fall down a business hole. But we have a gent who has a question.
Yeah. So automobile and appliance manufacturers learned last century that making something that you're going to own for the rest of your life is not a good business model, and we need you to buy a new one every 5 years or so. And I feel like the legacy style games are these consumable board games where you play through it, and I don't have my shelf of games that I've had for 20 years that I play through it 12 times and I'm done. And I'm wondering, is that a space do you think the whole industry is going to move towards to keep people desiring and purchasing new content?
Oh, yeah.
I can start there.
I'll finish it.
Yeah, I think the
I guess
industry.
you're in the middle.
I think I second that, yeah.
I think game players right now are already way too eager to play everything that comes out or churn through or their pile or play something one and be done. And then the cult of the new exists. And when you got 3,000 things to choose from, it's easy just to be like, oh, maybe this is better, right? You're chasing the high of like the perfect game. I'm giving a whole talk tomorrow morning at 9:30 about legacy games, so I'm not going to derail this to do that. But one thing that Legacy tried to do, which is often seen as doing the opposite, where you talk about like a consumable or a disposable game, is
Yes.
I wanted to give you a reason to play it 15 times. I didn't want to restrict you to play it 15 times. I wanted you to be like, that was fun, and if I play it a second time, it'll be different, and the third time, it'll be different. And so that was actually a way to try to get you to go back to a game rather than play it once and put it on the shelf and do the next one. So I don't think anyone's trying to do anything consciously. Well, I don't want to say that. Time Stories is sort of disposable. Not disposable, usable. It's like it's a coloring book,
It sort of is. Just before you answer, Jeff, I want a quick sort of poll of the room. How many people here have, in terms of like buying games that you might not get around to playing, who has a game that they bought that they haven't yet played that in their house? Oh my God! What a surprise, Jeff.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a trend towards that, and as I said in my little opening statement, I think that one of the really interesting things you can do with kind of a limited play game is explore narrative and story. You can build narrative arcs into games, and a lot of games have that, and successful games do that very well. But it's hard to build a real true story with turning points and stuff like that in a generative procedural way where it just kind of arises naturally out of what's going on. So by having games like Time Stories or things like that, it gives the designer space to go into that. And I'm curious to see how it plays out, because if it's easy to plug in modular content if you're a digital platform. Once somebody buys it, the distribution is a lot cheaper with a board game. You're invested in something. I think that maybe with marrying apps with board games to push through different types of content. I've always wanted to do a game like a Tales of the Arabian Nights, which comes with that giant thick book of adventures and basically like a choose your own adventure paragraph thing. I'd love to just see all that in an app, and then I can just as a publisher, I can just push new content out through the app to get people to pull it off the shelf again and say, hey, there's all kinds of new adventures in there. Go in and do it, and you have the framework and you can do it. I think that's very interesting. But I know I'll leave this to Eric to rebut, which I know he will, since we were talking about it earlier. But I kind of liken this with games to movies, and there are some movies. I really I thought Schindler's List was extremely well done, but I'm not going to go see it like Airplane, which I watched, 75 times, I'm not going back to see Schindler's List. So I think there's different experiences where you can have something that's, kind of one and done, and then there's other things that you will keep going back to and experience in a different way.
Go on, shoot him down.
We'll shoot you down afterward. But as a direct answer to Aaron's question, that I do believe that we are going to head into a slightly more, I guess, disposable, we'll call it, experience for board games. And I think it's going to happen more organically than by design. And that's mostly because of the state of the market. What we were talking about before, the market is, the supply is outpacing the demand by a huge amount. We're coming out with more board games, arithmetically more board games every year than the year before. And the growth is like 15 to 20% per year, which is a great growth curve, by the way, but its supply is outstripping that. So we talk a lot among game designers. We talk about the experience curve of a game, what it is, the lifespan of a game in everybody's collection from the time they buy it to the time they stop playing it. And for most people, the fun to work ratio is at its highest in the favor of fun during the early discovery part of the curve of the game. So the first 2 or 3 games that you play when you're just discovering what the different strategies are, regardless of whether it's a legacy game or a regular game, when you're discovering the new strategies, what the cause and effect of all the cool mechanics in the game, those are by far the highest, where you increase in skill and you increase in understanding the most between sessions. And that curve almost always flattens, especially with more modern, slightly more procedural games, that flattens very, very quickly. 4 or 5 games in, you kind of get it, and then you become incrementally better and better over time. That's much less sexy than moving on to the next game and getting that high of the really awesome part of the discovery curve. Legacy games are great at that because they're all discovery all the time. And we're noticing by trend, even some other games that aren't fully legacy, games like Mechs vs. Minions, games like the Harry Potter deck building game, Friedman Freeze's FF game, I don't know what.
Fabled Fruit.
Fabled Fruit, thank you. Where they build discovery elements into the game, even though it looks like by artifice, but it's in there. They're just deck building games that you discover you unwrap new parts of the content later on. You don't change anything, you just unwrap it. Because that's a lot more fun, and it also eases the learning curve. So I believe that we are headed in that direction. The more successful games will have a slightly more, will be focused more on first play experience, first play, second play, third play, which disposable games can do much better than other games, which have to sandpaper off a lot of the edge and a lot of the discovery in favor of replayability. So yeah, I do think so. I think maybe by this time in 5 years, I would predict that maybe close to 75% of the market will be discoverable games.
Wow, we've got a question patiently waiting on the side for a while now.
Yeah, so as I was waiting, I came up with other stuff to say. But so I wanted to go back to the discussion about Kickstarter versus publishers. So I've got a background in digital games. I've been currently working on some edible games, which are tabletop games where you actually eat the game, so it's very much consumable.
You're awesome.
But so I'm looking for like the next step. I'm planning to make a cookbook, and like you're talking about, like I don't necessarily have that many people who know me in the board game world, right? So do I try to approach a publisher or do I go to Kickstarter? Like is somebody who doesn't necessarily have a big name behind them, where do you recommend people start?
I can talk to that at least to start out, which is, to me, the question you should ask is not about necessarily the name, but how much work you want to do once you're done with the creation of this cookbook and the game. If you want that to be the first 10% of your experience, and then you're doing marketing and PR and booths and logistics and sales tax, and you really like that, like you like owning a small business, it's not as exciting to me, but there are people like, really enjoy the logistics of it, then that's the first question you should ask. And if you say yes, then you can ask, well, can I succeed at a Kickstarter? I think too many people are interested in knowing whether they would succeed or not, or whether it's fun or not, without thinking of how much work they want to do. If you want to write the cookbook and come up with edible games and then be done and move to the next creative endeavor, then you want to find a publisher. And that's the big decision, is how much do you want to do after creation versus the creation itself.
And I'd actually like to add, as a you also probably want to ask yourself if you want to be. What is your victory condition? Is your victory condition that you get this cool cookbook into the world, or is your victory condition that I become a game designer? That you have many more ideas that you want to publish that you think are viable to publish. They're two different tracks. They're two very different tracks. One of which, if you want to do this for a living, if you want to make more games than this, then especially nowadays in an age where there are so many designers out there that are looking to make a name for themselves, you will probably have to focus a little bit more on some of the on the externalities, right? For Jamie Stegmaier is actually a great example of this. Is he here?
I don't think so.
He could run this panel.
Yeah. You're doing a great job, Paul.
I can mute this microphone and say things that people won't know. Only you'll hear.
So build your part of that. It all boils down to building yourself into a brand. Become be awesome and be awesome in public. That's what I mean. That's a career in one sentence. But start a blog, share your thoughts on game design, share in both in the public sphere and in the industry sphere. And build yourself up as a name and a brand, and make sure that focus everything you have on your reputation. Every game you put out there is an extension of your reputation, and always make sure you're putting out the best game at any given time, which means, of course, as we'll talk about later, throwing out 90% of your stuff.
I want to briefly ask Jeff then, is this why you don't do this full time? Because there would be too much?
Yeah, My real business that I actually make money on, which we can talk about the monetary aspects of it too, but I have a company that does product manufacturing and importing and distribution and stuff like that. That's what I do. So I do that all the time. So for me, when I designed a game, it would have been very easy to roll that into that and just find the right factories to do it, and I could handle all the importing and stuff like that. But I knew I did not want to do that. The fun part for me personally was the designing part. And that creative aspect of the engineering of the game. And I didn't want to get involved in all of that back-end stuff that Rob was talking about, because I know what's involved in that. And I didn't want to have to go to all the trade shows, all the conventions, and be the guy sitting behind the table in the booth and, pushing their product. And some people are great at that. Colby Douch, started really small with Summoner Wars. Just, I remember him sitting at a little, 2x6 table and just pitching it and, turned it into a tremendous company. But I knew that that's not what I wanted. So you got to decide what you want to do. I will say I like the eating idea is fantastic. There's a game called Attack Vector Tactical, which is insanely complicated, but the tutorial for it is you put M&Ms all over the board and you fly your spaceship around and you have to try to shoot the M&Ms and you get to eat them as the reward. And that always goes over really, really well when I'm teaching that game. That gets people right through the tutorial.
Another question, sir.
You three are exceedingly good at your jobs, and not just once, but over and over and over again. And I would love to try to figure out why that is. And my way into that, perhaps, is I'd love to know, when you go to work as game designer, what is your day? What do you do?
Succinctly.
So boring.
I'm always at work. When people say, do you get to work from home? And I say, I have to sleep at the office. Right, so I will talk, and I've always got something in the back of my head, or like even walking around here, is constantly churning. A lot of my day is getting to the end of it and not getting done 90% of what I thought I was going to get done, because it's hard to be like perfectly in the creative zone and not get distracted and not be like, well, I'm going to start this. Oh, I got stuck. Well, I'm going to start something else, and I got stuck, and just keep going around like in a circle. But mostly it's just making something bad and then having the level of comfort that it's going to get better. And I think that it really comes down to stubbornness on my part, right? The stubbornness, like, no, not good enough, not good enough. I'll take the time. I'll stay up late. I'll drive an hour and play test it one more time. Because fear of not paying your bills is a very strong motivating factor. But I mean, it's spreadsheets, it's graphics, it's cutting cards, it's play testing, it's Skype calls with another designer. When you get to the business aspect of it, then it's contracts, then it's talking to publishers, then it's running to the bank and doing things like that. But if we're talking just pure design, for me, it's sketching, but I can't sketch, so it's typing. and spreadsheets and moving to like the right problem to the right software to solve the problem you have at the time. Like when numbers aren't very creative, but they help in one way, and then you can draw pictures or get into Illustrator and just make something look pretty when the numbers don't work. That's just me, and I'm trying to keep it succinct.
I'm sorry, I was not trying to be too snarky.
No,
but
that's fine.
But
a day is a long time.
Okay.
Or is it a part-time day for you, Jeff? Can you compartmentalize it?
Yeah, I can. Although I do a shocking amount of game design during meetings during the day of my real job. I do a lot. But I mean, for me though, the key is that I've got to have at least like 3, 4, or 5 different game design projects going on at the same time, because I always run into roadblocks. And the way my brain works is I need to be able to take one thing and just set it aside and let it lie fallow for a day or 2 or 3 and have something else to pick up and work on. And then by the time I run into a roadblock on that, something in the back of my brain has said, oh, do this and do that. So if I was just focusing on one game the whole time, I think it would be very challenging for me. I need that downtime.
Well, I mean, Rob and Jeff got the procedural parts down very well. So I guess the only thing I can add is that to do this for a living, I've come to the realization a couple of years ago that game design, at least for me, is of course it's a career, of course it's a job, it's a vocation, but it's a discipline and it's a point of view. So the discipline is about structuring the way you think and the way that you act, to view everything through the lens of play. And there's always, that's that running monologue at the back of your head in every activity that you do. So everything, I don't really play games specifically for inspiration to play other games. I play them for fun, to make games. I play them for fun. I go on a walk to get inspired for games. I go travel and talk to smart people like Paul to get inspired for games. See, I can compliment you too. But the discipline about it is that that I maintain a critical faculty for every creative endeavor that I both take part in as a consumer and as a creator. And it's just I spend a lot of time researching. I do panels like this. I just got a cool idea for a game talking to Rob a little bit earlier. You're not getting co-credit for it.
Yeah, Mike, you kept that to yourself.
But everything that they told you is true. But you have to filter everything that you have everything you think about, and basically it has to use up almost the totality of your bandwidth if you want to be doing this full time. You can't really be thinking about anything else, and you can't compartmentalize it as a part of what who you are.
So, one thing, you don't have to stand and wait. You can, is if you're thinking of making games or doing any creative endeavor, there's no right way to do it, but everyone has you have your own unique way that you can probably get unstuck. And when you figure out what that is, go do it. Like some people draw and some people write. And so I have discovered 2 things. If I need to solve a deeper problem, I need to drive where I can't check my phone or do anything, and I need to have classical music on, because I'll sing along with regular music and silence is deafening. But classical music fills it. So driving on the highway for like an hour is a great way to solve like a deeper problem. When I've got a more like top level problem that I want to solve, the best way for me to do it is to try to explain my problem to someone else, because in the act of explaining it, I don't want to look dumb and my brain just fills in some placeholder answer to make, it's like when you're trying to explain a dream, and in order to make sense, you sort of change the details to make it into a real story. I do that when I pitch a game, and then I'm like, no, never mind, I don't need any feedback, my brain just worked, but I can't do that. I almost got a dog just so I could do that, but that seemed like a strange reason to get a pet.
You know what, though? That works for me. I do find talking through problems, verbalizing them, somehow does something in your brain. It fires a different part of your brain. So,
just talking, real quick, Jeff. Just talking about being a full-time game designer or whatever, I mean, just in terms of the economics of it, just so you guys know, if a game sells for $50, the publishers, assuming you're not a publisher yourself, but if the game sells for $50, the publisher at retail, the publisher's selling it for $20. You usually get like 5%, 6%. Okay, so you get $1 a game. Most hobby game print runs are like 5,000 to 10,000 copies. So you're making $5,000 to $10,000 for the game. So if you spend a solid year designing a game, you can do the math. That's not necessarily viable. So you've got to be working on multiple projects and over time building things up and have a back catalog and things that will start to give you royalties accruing.
Hi. I wanted to ask about the thought process, both from a business and from a design point of view, when it comes to iterating and expanding on a game that has already released, and the decisions that go into the original design? Do you have an idea that you think, oh, okay, maybe that would be really good, and we put that to the side as a potential expansion down the road, or and make sure that the original game has some good hooks that'll plug into? Does it have to do more along the lines of like, oh, we sold more than we thought we would, maybe now is a really good time to sit down and think about a way to make it so more players can play it at the same time, or talk to some people about maybe retheming it or something along the lines? When do you feel it's worked best for you to consider adding more components or keep, pushing a project that has succeeded?
Yes. So if I can reframe your question, you're asking about the how do we decide whether a game is whether it is expandable? Do we think about it at the beginning, or is that something that generally comes later on in the product? I think for all three of us, it is really both. So of course, everybody wants to design internally. We all want to design the next great lifestyle game. We want to design the next Ticket to Ride, the next Monopoly, something that can be expanded infinitely in infinite ways and make infinite monies. But some games just naturally lend themselves toward a more closed, complete format. If you're, in my opinion, if the more honest you are with the design, the more you just leave it out there with your playtesters, it organically leads itself to one or the other. You can engineer a closed game to become an expandable game by putting more hooks in, by putting a little bit more complexity in, or you can decide, or the publisher can decide for you, we are designing a lifestyle game. My background is in trading card games and living card games. So I naturally think in terms of expandability, and most of the games I work on are designed to be theoretically infinitely expandable. So I design, usually the way I do it is design a hook, a good core game with a really, really, really solid foundation, and theoretically infinite expandable hooks that I can't necessarily, as one designer, that I can't possibly see all ends for, so that it is not necessarily solvable. If it's not solvable by me and my design team, then it is not. It will be not solved in 5 minutes by the rest of the internet and the real world.
I think about it. I don't design quite the same way Eric does, even though he just said it.
No, you don't.
We do. I feel like if you're spending a lot of time trying to design hooks for expansions or building your expansions and rolling out the first 6 SKUs for this product line, you're going to be very disappointed when 99% of the time that doesn't come to pass. I feel like when you design a game, most designers put too much in and have to take it out. So you probably have a pile of ideas that are already the start of an expansion, and if not, if it like sort of takes off and suddenly the publisher says, hey, I think we got a hit, we're going back for our 3rd printing and maybe we should do an expansion, you probably can find some way to get to it pretty quickly. Some games won't, and some games I've seen that really strain to do it where they've had a success and then the expansion, you're like, you didn't need that. But if there's a faction, there can be more factions. If there's not a 2-player game, there can be a 2-player game. So it's there. I don't spend a lot of time planning for them because you just don't know what's going to succeed. I say that, and there's season 1 on the front of a game that I did. But
So Jeff, I mean, you have done the Space Cadets games.
Yes.
Is that what happened? That you had certain ideas that didn't quite fit in one of the games, so they ended up in another?
No, actually, for when we decided to do the expansions for both Space Cadets and Dice Duel, we really started from scratch.
Okay.
The stuff that wasn't good enough to make the cut the first time just wasn't good enough. We didn't want to try to rehabilitate it and bring it back. So yeah, we started from scratch and designed some new systems and things like that. The only thing we did say was the name for the expansion for Space Cadets Dice Duel. The alternative name was Die Fighter. And I love that name so much, but the publishers decided not to do it. So when we did an expansion, I said we have to call it Die Fighter.
Please don't clap for puns. A question.
Yes. Earlier, Aaron Forsyth was asking about the future of potentially disposable games. You also mentioned Kingdom Death, which is a successful but niche game. And I'm wondering if you could comment on the potential future of niche games themselves as an alternative to disposable games. Games that have very small but rabid audiences, or games that are perhaps so expensive that people are sort of coerced into playing them, otherwise they didn't justify the purchase.
I like this question because I've never been asked it and don't have an immediate answer. I mean, if you talk about niche meaning a very small audience, the question I go back to is say like, well, why did the publisher make it? Because if the answer is they just wanted it out there and they didn't care about money, then they're just going to make the game that they want to play. And hopefully there'll be a few hundred people who find it. I used to make a joke about like the marketability and viability of games and say like, don't design a game that takes all day and 17 people to play because it'll never catch on. And then Megasiv came out and I was like, oh, or it will. I don't know. With the growth that we're talking about and the supply growth and the double-digit year-over-year growth, there's going to be games for everyone coming out, and it really comes down to why the publisher wants to do it. Is it to get a wide audience? Is it to get a specific audience? Is it to take a game that they've played at home for 5 years and they really love it and they just want a few people to play it so they can sort of pay the bills to go to conventions? I don't have a clear answer because I think that there's just so many different reasons that you would do it, but maybe one of these 2 people or 3 people will have a better one.
Well, I mean, I think that, of course, there will always be niche games, right? But it's, as Rob said, whether it's intended to be a niche game is a factor. And, I mean, board games are physical games, so they're always going to be subject to, in economics, the tyranny of objects. They're always going to be, there are hard manufacturing costs and economy of scale, which you lose once your audience is, once you are printing for a small audience. The manufacturing is getting cheaper, it's getting more automated, but it's also, the marketplace is also becoming a little bit more and more dominated by big publishers with, or conglomerated publishers with more economies of scale. So as long as there is room in the market for less career-oriented or less...
It's starting.
Wow.
I've been doing that in this room all day. I get used to it.
Or publishers that are a little bit less profit motive. That's really distracting. It will happen, but again, it depends on. There are a lot of externalities that matter here, right? A lot of our industry is driven by network externalities. So gamers meet in game conventions and they meet at game stores, game cafes. The more they remain viable, the more localized small cottage industries will be able to continue making small games, but they're going to be subjected to those local economies.
Jeff, what do you think? Do you agree?
Yeah, well, when I was talking about where the game industry was at a year ago or a year and a half ago, I said very strongly that it's definitely a push towards faster, shorter, simpler games. You know, Love Letter had just come out and was super popular, and it just seemed like nobody, before it was like, you know, when I was growing up, people used to play 3-4 hour games, and then it was like 2 hour games was normal, 90 minutes. Now it's like if it's over 60 minutes, nobody wants to look at it. But at the same time, like you said, you've got those, it seems like there's a little pushback now, and you've got these big, heavy games that are coming out that are finding a market and are in there. So I'm interested to see kind of if it's just, you know, going to be pulling on both ends or where that's going to end up. But I would love to see, I mean, I think in some sense that because of the physicality of board games, that there's opportunities that are missed. I would love to be able to do a series of really quick one-off type designs to explore different issues and things like that, which I think the video game world does fantastically to, you know, have more like art projects in a way than games. I'd love to be able to do a quick game about like, you know, being a refugee and experiencing life as a refugee and the choices that you make and things like that. That's not necessarily going to be commercially viable. So you either have to make it where it's, you know, print and play, or somebody can just blow it out themselves and just do it, or, you know, charge $100 and have it be like an art project kind of a thing where it's just a very limited audience. There used to be, with James Ernest had his company Cheap Ass Games, which I don't know if that model could, I guess there are some people like Button Shy that are trying to do these things, but they had a subscription service. I used to send them a check for $50, and then, every 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, a game would show up in my mailbox in an envelope, and you had to supply your own pawns and money and whatever and cut the cards out. But there were some fantastic ideas that went through there, and I'd love to see that kind of a model come through as well to allow some of this more niche stuff to find a home.
Hoyle's Book of Games with a 3D printer.
Yeah, well.
Sir.
So, like a lot of people in this room, I'm guessing, I had a job that I hated, and I was in a lot of meetings that went very long, and I had paper in front of me, and I decided to try to design a simple game. And I sort of got to a point where I was obsessed with it, probably to an unhealthy degree, and I was forcing my friends to playtest it, and it was like actually straining a lot of my friendships, and so it was really strange. And then, so I kind of like let it drop due to social pressure mostly, and I was like I kind of hit a roadblock like you were describing. And then now, like a couple of weeks ago, I noticed that there was like a game that's coming out soon that has a lot of, it's not the same, but it has a lot of similar ideas that than the game that I was sort of working on half-heartedly. And so I guess I have 2 questions, which is, one, how do you deal with like people telling you that you probably shouldn't spend so much time on this crazy dream project, and also the social pressure of like the only people that I have to play with, the only people I know who play board games are also like the friends who I play video games with, and they're sick of playtesting this crappy game. And 2, how do you deal with like, I mean, you guys probably, you guys live and breathe board games, so you have ideas all the time. So what's it like to like have that one idea tinkling in the back of your head, you focus on something else, and then 6 months later, something very similar comes out, and you go, oh, I almost had it. You know what I mean?
Is that, particularly that latter one, is that a thing any or all of you have had, I want to ask?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, to speak to number 1, fuck them. Follow your passion.
Wow.
Number 2, we've talked about this a lot, actually. Do you want to tell my insane story?
You have so many, I actually don't know which one you mean.
the throwing away of every.
Oh, you did do that, didn't you? Eric, like last year, was putting up on Twitter that he had thrown away all of his prototypes, like physically, digitally gone, not set them aside. And I was like, he must be speaking metaphorically. And then we were working on a project, and we took a Christmas break, and we came back, and we had spent 8 months on it, and hours of meetings, and I had flown to Toronto, we had played it, and I was like, I'm not feeling it. He's like, me neither. And he was just done, and we threw it away and started on something new, and it was actually one of the best decisions we ever made, because we would have labored to have a game that was like a B-, and we just both could see it. I'm not sure that I would have had the bravery to like throw it away quite like that, or literally throw things away like you do. Sometimes it's good to put games on a shelf and come back to them because you have fresh perspective. Sometimes it's good to realize that this was a good idea, but it's not a good game, at least not now, maybe not ever. And the hard part as a game designer is figuring out when you're stuck versus when it's a bad idea. Because you're going to get to that point where you're stuck and you're like, I'll just start the next thing because it's shiny and it's easy and it doesn't have any problems yet. And you can keep doing that and you will learn things, but you'll never learn to get past that first obstacle that you reach. I've had games I've designed, I've played games that I get mad because I didn't design them because it was so obvious in retrospect and you don't see all the work that went into it. I've seen games where I had like half an idea and then 2 years later someone came again like, yeah, that was my idea, but they did the work, they did the sweat to do it and they had it come out. There are a lot of games that are like a lot of other games and you can still keep working on a game if it's similar to another game. Just make it your own. It'll be different.
Agreed.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. It's the reality is there's so many games, there's very, very, very few new ideas. The chances are almost, it's almost a certainty that the game that you've come out with, that somebody has done something similar at some point, or you're combining and mixing and matching ideas from other places. So, I would just proceed with it, and like Rob said, if there's, just if you can put your own twist on it, come out with it, and it still will be fine. And in terms of playtesting, I feel your pain on that. That's always an issue with a game group of you have your friends over. I know Eric has a dedicated playtest game group. In my situation, I played kind of the long game, and I just had kids, which ultimately worked out really well. But now they're out of the house, so that had a narrow window when it worked.
Well, I was going to say, Jeff, you said you often have 3 or 4 different things going around in your head at the moment. How long do they sort of live for before they get thrown away, metaphorically or literally?
It's variable. I mean, some I'll work on for a couple months, and it'll be obvious that it goes nowhere. The Fog of War, the first concepts of it were literally 12 years before publication, 14 years before publication. I worked on it before it was finally ready to go.
Wow.
And that was a really new idea. I mean, that was something that I was trying to do that had never been done, or that had never seen any games that had been done. So it just took a lot of time to wrap my head around it.
Hi, I know a big part of the game design process is like iterative design and playtesting. So I was just wondering, as more playtesting tools come out, like on Steam or through other sources, how has playtesting evolved, and where do you see that going?
I'm super excited to try like Tabletopia and some of these other tools for playtesting, especially later stage playtesting, where you want outside groups to do it, because that's always a challenge, to actually print up sets and get them to testers. And actually, hardest of all is when you send stuff out, is to get them to actually get back to you. You'll go on Twitter and say like, hey, I've got this game to test. Can you guys look at it? And you get 1,000 responses, and you send them out, and maybe 2 people get back to you. So yeah, I think it's going to be great to be able to actually get groups in there and watch them play, and to be able to interact with people while they're playing the prototype.
Surely, were we just saying you had sort of the same playtest groups that you tend to play with?
Yeah, I was just sort of lost in thought a little bit while Jeff was talking, in the good way, because it struck an idea that there probably could be a whole panel about the different stages of playtesting groups and playtest needs. But the real short version is that it starts out usually I'm playing the game against myself, and then every step I'm weaning it away, both from me as a player to me being there at all, to like eventually strangers at the end. So getting a core playtest group at the beginning who knows game design and is fine playing something broken and you changing it in the middle, and playing the same thing 5 weeks in a row with slight changes is kind of vital. You don't want to do that digitally or send it out at that point. But to Jeff's point at the end, you want to just have a group play it that you don't know at all, and you're not there, and you can't, even with your body language, be like, oh, right, where they know they did something wrong, and then see how that is. So there's like probably 3 or 4 different play testing stages that I'm just thinking about now, but it's kind of interesting to get back to.
Totally could be its own panel. I mean, to answer your question, like where do we see playtesting going? So one of the big advantages that the digital medium has over tabletop, of course, right, is real-time analytics and perfect analytics. And working on Duelist is a joy, right? Because we can spread our testing over thousands and thousands of players and analyze the data in seconds in real time, and synthesize that like so quickly. It's hard to do in playtesting. I've spent a lot of time and many years cultivating a group of about like 150 playtesters that we have locally, and my wife runs that full time. So we do cycle through playtesters a lot. It's a big. I would say it's about a quarter of our day. Like that's our job. But one of the things with things like Tabletopia, and hopefully maybe a little bit more advancement in VR and stuff like that, is we actually might be able to get as close as we can to transforming blind testing, what we used to do, sending games out to groups to play blind, but not being able to observe their body language. And so we might be able to capture that a little bit better in real time, and start to be able to run like full analytics on that for tabletop games. I see that being a reality in like 3 to 4 years, and I think that will change so much about the way, in my opinion, that games are designed. That I think right now the minimum bar for a tabletop game is that it's not broken, right? Which I think very soon that won't be a thought anymore. The minimum bar for a game is that it plays well, it's fun, it matches its playtime exactly, it is fun for all play counts, it has multiple roads to victory. That'll be the same minimum bar as not broken is today because of that.
The question here, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. We can run over a little bit because I think we're the last session. After this question, I'm going to just jump in possibly with one of my own as well that I really want to get out.
Thank you. Can you speak about the future of CCG and TCGs, not Magic? And also maybe some of the economy, but not just the economy of it, but the future of it. I hear you talking about board games, but CCG.
That's a valid question. I mean, surely they are perennially popular in one form or another.
Sure. So, I mean, CCGs are, I mean, there's still, I mean, you can't talk about CCGs without talking about Magic, unfortunately. I'll keep it relatively short. I mean, Magic it was the first. It is still considered by many to be the best. They have the, and I'm not just sucking up to the Wizards guys in here, but they do a phenomenal job on it, and they continually set the bar for design development. But games, there has been a huge renaissance in the development of CCGs with notably Hearthstone and the many games that followed since. I work on a game in that space. There's always, they fill a clearly defined and demonstrable need for a perpetually discoverable game that you don't have to throw away pack after pack, that has this really cool institutional memory that which is in everybody's collection. I don't think that's fundamentally going to change, but they're also the single type of game that is the most subject to this buzzword called network externality, right? Where the value of the game is equal to the number of players playing it. So it's going to, sadly speaking, it's not a wide open market. It's not something that where like a whole bunch of indie games can survive. It's going to be in any medium where every advance that is made, there is going to be one winner, very, very clear winner that takes the lion's share of the market, which will be Magic in the real world, in the tabletop world, Hearthstone in the digital space, and whatever the new innovation is, the new medium is in the next space. It's like Star Wars Destiny just came out from Fantasy Flight. I'm sure a lot of you guys have played it. It's cards and dice, like Dice Masters. But that is any other game that follows that follows them is going to fall subject to the same thing. So I think there will always be something in that space. There will always be cheaper and cheaper to obtain for the player, because especially as we expand into the parts of the world with a shrinking middle class, or just a burgeoning middle class. So I think fundamentally the games won't change, but maybe the packaging and business model will a little bit.
What do you think makes a good CCG?
I'm sorry?
What do you think makes a good CCG, or what is the,
That's a good one.
What makes a good
CCG?
Richard Garfield.
Yeah.
I think we'll. Sorry, go
Sorry,
on.
it's
a long question. It's a long answer. It's a whole panel
It could
of
be
itself.
a whole panel, and I'd love to talk to you about it afterward.
I think we'll have time to get to the rest of you folks who've come up. Thank you all for coming up and asking questions. I want to throw something at all of you because I am worried that if I don't ask it, nobody else will. So we're saying that it's relatively easy to paper prototype at home. It's relatively easy for maybe all of us here to try and make a board game and design a board game and be a one-time board game designer, or occasionally a board game designer, or a successful board game designer if our work is good enough, if our ideas are smart enough. So why are we just 4 guys stood up here, and why am I only meeting guy game designers pretty much all the time wherever I go?
I don't know.
I think it's a problem. I think that it's something that hopefully will. I think part of it was just that. I think that the current group of game designers kind of came out of game design in the 80s and the 90s, when it was more D&D and Cosmic Encounter and stuff like that didn't attract women as much at that time. So I think there's just sort of that class that kind of grew up. I'm hoping that it changes. My daughter, Sydney, co-designed a bunch of games with me, and it was, I think that I was very proud of that, and she's done a great job with that and brought a whole different perspective on a lot of stuff. So I'm hoping that it's going to just be something that will take time to do it. I don't feel like there's necessarily a bias against women coming and pitching a game that would be turned away versus other ones. I'm just hoping that it's just, because of the nature of the early 70s and 80s gaming and that culture, that it's kind of a hangover, in essence, from that.
Do we agree?
I guess this is the part where I get in trouble. So, I do believe we are absolutely institutionally biased and sexist. That it's not purposeful, but something that we need to get better at, and a lot of us speak pretty loudly about it. We're not particularly welcoming to women and minorities in gaming because it's just not something that comes up in conversation often enough. I screw up still all the time, right? We make games where we still casually put one-sided cheesecake into the game art. We're still a little bit too objectifying toward women as we are toward men. It's part of this, in my opinion. We don't have enough women in game design, and it can't possibly be because women aren't interested in game design. I mean, if you look at the marketing data for mobile games, over half of it is women. So we're all creative people. We almost like we said before, every gamer is a game designer. So the same number of women must be creative and want to get into the game design business. It is mostly up to us to be more inviting for women to become game designers. In my opinion, we have to do it from the top down. It's not like we should say more women should come up and design games. Or no, we have to be more welcoming. It's a long and ongoing conversation, but it is the burden of that falls on us rather than on women, if that makes sense.
Yep. I agree with some combination of what they've said, and in order to keep things short, I'll just add a couple new points, which is I've taught game design at 2 different colleges over the past couple of years, and I've been encouraged to see almost half of my students have been women, where I think that, so it looks like this next generation is seeking it out and getting the opportunities. And so I think hopefully there's some sort of change happening at the bottom as well as happening at the top, and they get the opportunities, when they're looking for jobs. But I mean, it's still there's an underlying thing. I work full time with my wife. She's an art director, graphic designer, and a hardcore gamer. And it still cracks me up when we will sit down and someone will teach a game to the 2 of us and assume that I'm going to crush them. And she always wins. And I never win, and they just don't see it coming, and you can tell they're always kind of a little bit like, a girl just beat me. It's this weird thing that's just ingrained at a level that is not out yet, but I'm hoping every incident and every change and every student, every person starts adding up to a larger change. But
how do we help get that out? How do we help change that? Because we're the people on the stage here right now talking about this, and who are going to be on film and watched later. So we're pretty much at the top of that, right?
Well, step 1, any women in the audience interested in being game designers for a living? Come talk to me in 5 minutes.
Yeah, come talk. I mean, there's things. I'm part of Restoration Games, and we're doing a game which is, I know this is a cutting edge theme, but we put it in the Italian Renaissance. It just works there. But so it should be like the Medicis, and they should be all just white guys on the card art. And we just decided, we put in the book this is not a history book. So there's Asian people and people of color and women and older people and younger people and all body types. And so the company that I have an active say, I'm just no, we're kind of showing a cross section of the world, even if it's not historically accurate, which I think no one would have thought of 20 years ago and may have thought of 10 years ago and said, yeah, but we can't do that because it's not right. So I'm trying to do it where I can in terms of at least portrayal and things. But yeah, like Eric said, if see me, see us, try to help.
A question. Yes.
I have a question about accessibility in board games. I play with a colorblind board gamer, and why am I still sticking dots on the red cubes?
What a good question. Some of my favorite video game designers are actually colorblind, and some of them have started, it's very easy to modify video games to do this. It doesn't seem to be a thing in board games.
It does. We just suck at it right now. We're getting better. We really are. It is especially among some of the bigger publishers, a lot of us, we have a pretty good checklist of development before we put a game out the door. And this checklist is expanding, and in good ways, in positive ways, in my opinion. But generally, it takes a mistake to add something to that checklist. And colorblind accessibility, haptic accessibility for blind players, those are both items that are on the checklist for more and more games if we can possibly help it. We recently, with Blood Rage, we totally screwed up. Like publicly admitted, no problem. Like we had a really bad color scheme, and it was pointed out to us by players with none of our playtesters played with final components, and was point out to us. And now it is on the checklist for every single game that we do on the Pantone scale to make sure that it does not trigger the most common types of color blindness. We'll never be perfect, but we're getting there, hopefully.
Sir.
I had a question about kind of gameplay versus theme. When you guys are developing a new game, do you guys typically think about new gameplay mechanisms or game mechanics or how to merge existing mechanics, or do you come up with a theme and then try to match mechanics to it? And then kind of a follow-up, but have we reached peak Cthulhu yet? Because it seems like
Well, that's
everything...
no, there's no peak Cthulhu.
No,
it's Cthulhu all the way down.
Always room for Cthulhu. Cthulhu is the ice cream of gaming.
Yeah. I will tell you, it's always a little bit different. Every designer is going to tell you different. Every time I work on a project's different. I tend to do mechanics or mechanisms later, but not always. Sometimes it's theme or story. Sometimes it's an emotional experience that I want to get. Sometimes I'm inspired by something I tend to be inspired outside of gaming and then use gaming tools to make it a game. So I might be inspired by television, or like my daughter goes off to college, my first child this fall. And so like, what's that feel like? And is there a game in that feeling? The answer is probably no. But like, that's like an interesting, like, how do I get people to an emotional space or something like that? So the inspiration comes from all different places. But Susan McKinley-Ross, I don't know if she's here, but she did Quirkle, and she talks about how she does mechanics. And most of her games are abstract. And if I do an abstract game, as soon as I hit my first sticking point, I need to put a theme on it to figure out how to get unstuck. So it differs from people.
Jeff, you're gonna...
very much, I teach this to my class. This is the very first class that we do, is experience first. It's not mechanics, it's not theme, it's experience. You know, it's real easy to say I'm going to do a zombie game, which is the Cthulhu of 2 years ago, I guess. But, you know, are you going to be an entire nation fighting off zombies? Are you just going to be trapped in a mall? You know, you got to get to that experience, what I call the experience, or the emotional core. And I think that's what really carries you through. Even if you end up totally changing the theme later, if you've got that experience, or another way to look at it is the story that you want the players to tell when they're done.
Interesting. Player perspective, the end goal maybe rather than the start goal. Mm-hmm. Thinking backwards.
Right.
Huh.
Cool. Hi, thanks for the talk. Thanks for sticking around to answer the last question. So I was kind of inspired. My question changed as I stood in line by the question about diversity. I was curious to learn a little bit more about the development team behind a board game, because often you see like the designer's name on the box. I assume that's like the main guy, and that's all of you guys, right?
It's only the designer, that's it.
Right. Well, I'm wondering, you know, my wife was not a gamer. She didn't grow up a gamer. She's recently started playing board games with me, but there aren't a lot of themes that appeal to her, you know, in the same way that they appeal to me. I'm wondering if that's because teams are not as diverse. Like video games require these huge collaborative efforts, whereas board games can be kind of one guy's idea all the way through. And is there more that we could maybe be doing to diversify the development teams behind board games to get those new perspectives in?
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, but it's always going to be, board game design, I think just by its nature, both the economics of it and the way that it's done is always going to be smaller teams. So it's you'd have to really make sure that you had it built in. I cracked up during the Mechs and Minions presentation was given, and his last slide was like, we had such a small team working on this game, and they show a picture of like 15 people that all contributed, and I'm like, I've never been involved with more than 3 people developing a game, so this would be like a huge, massive project. Even like Fantasy Flight and stuff like that, they have maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 people, so it's not done on the same kind of scale. But yeah, if you bring in other voices and other people, that's going to help diversify it.
Well, as board games become bigger budget, and this is happening actually at Fantasy Flight, this is happening too, there is a little bit of a cultural shift. So, of course, the designer is the person that gets their name on the box because we're fragile creatures with egos that need constant attention. But of course, there's behind every board game, there's a development team, an art director, artists, a producer, and on the flip side, there's a sales team, marketing team, et cetera, et cetera. But I was actually inspired about 15 years ago or so, and I teach this to every single team that I work with on the board game side. I was inspired by the way that Wizards of the Coast defines design and development, which could be a panel in and of itself, and I'm slightly redefining it, so apologize to my Wizard, but like design development, we're essentially beginning and end for all intents and purposes. It's a Venn diagram of skill sets that is very, very that's a high degree of overlap, but the development team is designer is essentially responsible for the vision of the game. They're the ones with whom the idea is born, and they have to. It's their responsibility to execute on the idea and make a game and be responsible for the vision. Development team being responsible for carrying the vision, taking another set of eyes to that viewpoint, and matching the actual experience in a multitude of different environments to match that vision. The board game teams are becoming bigger. They are like even Fantasy Flight now. They generally have agile teams, about 2 or 3 people that work on every different game. So there's usually a lead person, which is the designer, but there is a back-end development team where somebody besides the designer has final call on certain things. The answer to your question, how we diversify that, the same way to diversify everything else. Just bring more people into the industry, make the industry more appealing for more different people with different perspectives, and let them fall where their talents lay rather than where we want to engineer to put them.
Right, and I guess that's kind of the quick follow-up, right, is if the reason there aren't that many women in is because you have this generation of men who played D&D growing up and becoming designers, do you then now have the same problem where you have the generation of men playing the games made by the men who played D&D, and you don't ever get that new sort of
At some point,
inroad?
you have to break the cycle.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I've been super gratified. I mean, I went to Origins 3 in 1978, right? And it was like 100% guys, and even, in the 80s and 90s. And now if I go to Gen Con or I go to our local game conventions, it's usually, pretty close to 50-50 women, men. And I know that there's issues and there's, behaviors which are not acceptable and things like that. But in general, it's so much different now, the culture of board gaming, than it was back in the 80s.
I think we will have to take the rest of the questions outside if you folks don't mind doing that, because I'm sure the panel are nice enough that they would do that. Thank you, everyone, for coming and for your questions.